Okay, so I'm Alex Oliver, and this is my final project for the LRU women's soccer data review. So just to go ahead and get started, we're going to start with athlete one. Here I was looking at preseason with athlete one, and the data shows that there's a very high sprint duration, which is what we can see here in our AC ratio graph. And although the AC ratios were very high, it didn't have a very high strain on the athlete. But as we continue to look through the graph, when we get to weeks 8 and 10, the data shows that this athlete is going through a lot of strain um, through her workout and through her workload as it directly applies to her sprint duration. So I would show this to coach. Maybe she needs to be cut back a little bit so that there's not as much strain on her body. There was also, as we can see in the AC ratio graph, around that same time as week 10, there's a very high ratio that is surpasses our upper limit. So we might want to tell coach, show coach, so that we're not overworking this athlete, and so that she can bring those ratios down a little bit and not have as much strain. Or we might be able to tell coach so that we can level those out, so that they're not those big of spikes on weeks 8 and weeks 10. As we move on to athlete 2, we're looking at average GPS session load. So this athlete shows very inconsistent loads during training. From the data, they show to have very high peaks and very extremely low days. The athlete does not spend much time in the peaks, but they may just need to be motivated a little bit more and monitored to make sure that they're giving full effort on the field and that they're not spending too much time in the lower zone. So we can see in the AC ratio graph that around the middle of the season, this athlete tailored off a little bit with their workload, which could be expected due to coach not wanting to stress too much and making sure that they can go deep into playoffs. But we do see towards the end of the year a spike in overall workload, which also has a spike in the effect size. So that is a pretty large effect, and we would want to monitor that towards the end of the season to make sure that she is not overworking in any given week. Athlete 3, we're going to look at sleep quality. So we can see that athlete 3 reports having pretty moderate level of sleep quality. There is a dip around 9:14 to 9:28. It is up and down, but for the most part, there's a big dip in sleep quality. So this athlete is having lower levels of sleep. There was normal sleep duration. The hours didn't vary that much, but the quality really went down. And the data shows it going back up the next few weeks and then plummeting again. The week of 10/26 would be of concern. She might not have recorded, but also the following 10/19 is also pretty low and is on a steady downcline from 10/12. That might be worth reporting to coach. She might need to be given some resources on how to deal with this low sleep quality. And her stress levels didn't vary that much, but she also might not be reporting exactly what's going on. This also directly correlates with her mood. We can see that when the data shows lower sleep quality, she has a lower mood as well. And we want to make sure that we're looking out for all of our athletes as people and not just athletes. So that was athlete 3. Athlete 4, her soreness levels have been reported to spike throughout the season. We know that our athletes are also training in the weight room with Coach Caldwell as they're going through these training loads and as they're going through season, but she has very high soreness levels and peaks throughout the season. We can see there's 4 very high ones that are almost to our upper limit. So we would want to monitor during those weeks to make sure that we're not pushing the athlete too much. She's also going through high levels of strain throughout the entire season, which is expected with these college athletes. But with this athlete specifically, the data would suggest that she might need to go through some extra recovery and relaxation recovery methods to make sure that these levels of soreness are not impacting her level of play. Athlete 5, I don't know if you can see this. Let me move me down here. Okay. Athlete 5, again, has overall stress, shows these overall stress loads. Her questionnaire data shows peaks of high stress that are right at our upper limit, so we would want to monitor during these weeks. Specifically 928, 95 that week, very, very high stress levels, also correlated with lower levels of sleep quality. This athlete was getting sufficient sleep, but her quality remains low throughout the entire season. So this might be something of concern that we could bring up to coach and show him the data points that she's reporting that she's not sleeping well, and she is carrying a lot of stress throughout the weeks of season. Okay, so athlete 6. With athlete 6, if I were going to mention data to coach, I would show these two graphs. The left is an AC ratio graph of athlete 6's GPS workload, and to the right on the bottom, there's an AC ratio graph demonstrating the athlete's total sprint distance. Not that it is our place to coach, but these show that athlete 6 worked a lot harder in preseason and postseason than maybe in the middle of the season. This isn't uncommon, but she really didn't show anything to be concerned with according to the data. But if I did have to say something, I might bring up that she could be pushed a little harder in the middle of the season to really see if we could get her full potential consistently, and not just at the beginning and at the end, but if she could show up throughout the entire season. Athlete 7, I was kind of a little concerned with the monotony and strain. There are very low strain levels, very high monotony levels with athlete 7 throughout the entire season. Preseason was under a lot of strain, but then after that, kind of plummeted. So maybe she needs to be a little bit encouraged, or maybe she needs to have somebody believe in her extra, maybe just something to bring up to coach. When compared with her sprint count, it shows she has high monotony and decently high strain. So athlete 7 spends a good amount of time in sprints and not covering as much distance, which, depending on her position, that may be appropriate. We would encourage her to look into her deceleration zones as it applies to the stress of the soft tissue structures. The data that we have with athlete 7 consistently shows higher effect sizes with her deceleration zones. So bringing this up to coach might encourage him to go with some preventative prehab, if you will, for the knees of these kind of players, specifically athlete 7. I was looking at her deceleration zones, and she spends a lot of time decelerating. And like I said, her sprint count is very high, very strenuous on her knees and her body. Athlete 8, we're going to look at the average GPS session load. This data demonstrates and is evident that athlete 8 tailored off her workload through the meaty part of the season and picked back up towards the end. So this is a more common trend, as the data has shown throughout all of these athletes, but athlete 8 specifically had a major spike in effect size the last 2 weeks of play. This will be brought to the coach's attention just to show how hard she is working, and maybe he could encourage her to work that hard throughout the season, especially if she was playing well. We would want to bring this to coach's attention, like, hey, she's working hard, and if it correlated with, her playing on the field, it might be good to bring to her attention as well. Not necessarily a concern. I think the concern would more be that throughout the season she kind of tailored off and wasn't being pushed as hard, wasn't working as hard, and kind of fell off and wasn't as consistent. Athlete 9, the data suggests that she may need to be introduced to body maintenance throughout the season. Here we're going to look at monotony and strain as it applies to athlete 9's sprint top speed, and this data suggests high strain levels, which also correlates with higher levels of soreness. The data also shows that she was out or restricted in some way towards the later part of the season, specifically week 9 and 10. And if we can get out ahead of this and show these levels of strain on her body and show these levels of soreness, maybe we could have avoided pulling her that much. I'm not sure if she had an injury, but I would be concerned with these continuous high levels of strain. And then this plummet shows that something was off, something was not right, and it could be due to her soreness and her fatigue as well. Both these graphs correlating and supporting that. Athlete 10, her self-reported data shows, let's see, shows a spike in stress. As we get through the middle of the season, specifically around 10-5, we can see a common trend of stress with her starting to be reported as higher levels, which is common. The end of the season, finals, midterms, holidays, playoffs, like we expect that, I think, but the data does support it. The data shows that this athlete really started to struggle with stress and was really having a hard time getting it consistently down. So this might be brought to coach's attention to try to get these spikes down. If we could get out ahead of it and see the data, 10-12, it starts to go up, and after that, it's up and down, but towards the higher end of the spectrum. I would think about bringing this to coach early on to see if there could be some intervention and some help gotten to this athlete in regards to stress levels. Athlete 11. So with athlete 11, the data suggests poor sleep quality. When looking at the data, there's ample sleep duration that was recorded, but after the first few weeks, this quality seems to be severely lacking. Because this is an important aspect of recovery and overall health, I think this should be monitored and reported to the coach. I would also alert the coach that between weeks 9 and 10, the data shows that there's a spike in total GPS session load, which have placed high levels of strain on the athlete. That was also correlated with a very high effect size or moderately high effect size. With this kind of strain and this kind of effect and this kind of increased workload, it is important that the athlete is sleeping well. So I think these all go together, that the sleep quality is very, very lacking throughout the season, which also may be influencing the overall performance of athlete 11. Athlete 12 shows a increased rate in the overall GPS session load with their AC ratio data points towards the end of the season, week 10, week 9, week 10. Her monotony drops, but the strain is extremely high due to increased workload, which also had a large effect size that coach would need to be notified about. Her data is pretty consistent leading up to this week, but this spike, we want to make sure that we're not overworking, or that she's not overworking, that the data is not showing that she's doing too much and might need to be pulled back a little bit, especially going into playoffs. We would want coach to be aware that she's under this much stress and strain. Athlete 13 has several days that she reports her stress levels being over the limits that the data wants it to be at. This would be worth telling coach so that maybe she could be introduced to some relaxation tools or sent to one of our many resources that could help her get this under control. Or maybe she just isn't aware that she has this much stress. Sometimes it's just bringing it to their attention, but we would definitely want coach to know that she is reporting that she is stressed and that she is very fatigued. Like I said, the data suggests that most of these athletes are fatigued throughout the season and are carrying a good bit of stress, being the collegiate athletes that they are. But athlete 13 shows pretty high levels of fatigue and stress throughout the season. And this might be worth reporting sooner on than later to try to get this controlled and, again, see the athlete as a whole person and not just on the field. We want to make sure that they're taken care of all around. Athlete 14 shows an elevated strain measure during week 8 that coach will be notified about in regards to her sprint count. The overall distance covered also gives a higher measure of strain due to the increased ground being covered. Her sprint speed, as I looked, the data maintained pretty consistent, but with this increased quantity of work, she still shows elevated strain levels. So that would be a data point that coach would need to know about in week 8 to make sure that 9 and 10 we can see that there's a drop off in the data, a drop off in the strain. But we want to make sure that she can be consistent and not overworking in that week 8, that she is allowed to recover and regroup as needed. Athlete 15 reports increased stress and low sleep quality through week 6 and 8 that would need to be told to the coaching staff. This would be an area of concern that the athlete is not getting proper rest and needs a way to decompress, recover, rest, all that good stuff, so that she can keep playing and keep producing on the field as well as in the classroom. Athlete 16 has